ओम नमः श्री यतिराजाय विवेकानंद सूरये सच्चित सुख स्वरूपाय स्वामिने तापहारिणे. So we were discussing the first sutra of the second chapter, which is entitled Concentration and its Practice. We discussed about concentration, its aims or goals in the first chapter, which comprised of 51 sutras, and now we come to the second chapter, which deals with how to attain, what are the different steps to attain to this concentration. We know the goal, but we still have to understand its methodology and try to find out how exactly we make preparations to increase our concentration and reach the goal of concentration, that is samadhi. Now, samadhi, as we discussed, and this point should be remembered, does not mean nirvikalpa or nirvichara samadhi alone. There are various stages of concentration which result in various kinds of attainments. So the goal changes according to the type of concentration we manage to achieve in our limited life. Time is very short, our life is short. That is why in this verse, Swami Vivekananda is trying to impress upon us that we should not waste time and begin preparations immediately, because once the goal has been asserted, why we need concentration, what are the uses of concentration, what does it help, what does it help us to achieve in life, and what does samadhi do, what is the need for attaining to this level, different levels of concentrations. So dhyana, ultimately the goal is to reach samadhi. The reason is that when we attain to samadhi, then and then alone, all our miseries, whether it is due to physical causes, mental causes, or spiritual causes. In Sanskrit, the word used is tapatraya. Traya means three types of miseries which every human being has to encounter in his life. Now, the only solution after so much of struggle, after so many experiments, our yogis or our shastras, they found out that the only way to solve these problems is to transcend them. There is no shortcut. And to transcend these problems, to transcend the problems that we encounter in our gross, in our subtle worlds, and also at the causal level due to bad samskaras, they keep on haunting us, even if there is no direct effect of those samskaras on us, but we do not know when they will prop up and cause depression, cause so many psychological as well as physical problems. Ultimately, it boils down to removal of this tapatraya, which results in dukkha. So all our misery, our shastras have classified into three types. And for these miseries to vanish, the only and only way is the yoga way, or it is the way with which, by doing which, we transcend these troubles. We confront them as far as we can, but there comes a limit, and then we want a higher solution. We just don't believe in patchwork anymore. We can do some kind of patchwork and somehow manage to live, manage to survive in this world. And all of us are doing that. Most of us are trying to survive. Uh, though we think our problem will be solved, and we keep on searching for newer and better solutions, but somehow the final solution eludes us. So our scriptures, they were wise enough, they understood the people, the rishis, they were wise enough. They suggested a permanent solution to our problems, though they may be temporary. So if you have temporary problems, then temporary solutions can work for some time. We can postpone the inevitable for some time. But if the temporary problems keep on repeating itself, then we get disgusted. And that is how Vairagya comes in our life. Otherwise, there's no need for Vairagya if we are happy all the time. If God had so wished, He would have made everybody happy. The nature of the world is such that it is anityam, asukham, lokam. So this seems to be a negative thought, but it is not negative. It is a matter of fact, a matter of reality. The sooner we understand, the wiser we are, and the quicker we will get to the solution, to the root solution of the problem. Otherwise, we will depend on patchwork. We'll solve one problem, and just to realize that there's another problem waiting for us. We solve that problem, do some patchwork there, another problem arises. So this is how our life is a constant struggle against different obstacles, either self-created or created by others. But even if it has been created by others, it is because of some basic karma which we have done. So our karma theory explains everything. Nobody gets any misery which is undeserved. We may cry hoarse and say that I didn't deserve this misery. I've never done a bad thing in this life. But what about previous lives? So our Hindu philosophy or yoga also believes that the karmashaya or the karma, the collection of karma, which the baggage of karma with which we have been born, they have to be either worked out or endured. So there are different methods to do this, and that is the topic of this particular sutra, Tapaha Swadhyaya Ishvara Pranidhanani Kriya Yoga. Tapaha Swadhyaya. Tapaha means, as I told you, it is austerity. We will not go deep into this idea of austerity, though we discussed last time what tapaha means. It's not just some kind of mortification of the body or the senses as Jains and some ancient Christian traditions did. The practice of austerity we saw in the sense of the Upanishads or the Hindu philosophy is something which enables us to control the mind and hence the body, the senses, and all the related grosser things. And that control is because of tapas. Tapas means heat. Literally, it means heat. So, whenever you are going against the current, some heat is generated. That is the idea behind this tapas. It does not mean mere mortification of the body as some traditions do. So, there is, you remember that there is a difference between rituals, which in Hinduism, some of the rituals are done just to do tapas or austerity. For example, fasting. In many traditions, they say on special occasions you have to fast. So that is a kind of tapas. It's part of the ritualistic worship. Many of our Hindus, they say without fasting, they don't worship God. First, they have to fast, then they will go and do some kind of formal or ritualistic worship. If they have eaten anything, then they are prohibited. So these are self-imposed disciplines which can be called as tapas. But before we discuss in detail why certain rituals are known as tapasya or austerity, so we have to understand there is a basic difference between the Christian and the Hindu conception of a ritual. If we leave out of consideration the the Quakers is a sect of Christianity who rejects all the rituals altogether. They don't believe. The Quakers don't believe in rituals. And then there are certain Protestant sects, the Church of England, who minimize the importance of these rituals. They are not as ritualistic as the Roman Catholics are. So one may say that Christians, Roman Catholics, I mean, a majority of the Roman Catholics regard their various acts of rituals as sacraments. They are known as sacraments. That is, they are intrinsically beneficial to the person who is following this ritual as a sacrament, and they are absolutely essential. The church tells you to do, so you have to do. These are the various rituals which are have to be done, even though it might feel as if you have to do some austerity. You have to have some kind of discipline and control in order to follow these sacraments. But they can be, the difference between Hindu rituals and the other rituals is the priestcraft is a bit less in the Hindu system of ritual. Most the Vedic rituals, in fact, were supposed to be done at home. There was no church, no common place of worship where these rituals had to be done. All the homa and other things, everybody did in their own house. There was no common idea of temple or place of worship. Temple or place of worship, it is a post-Buddhistic idea. Actually, Buddhism and later on Christianity and other religions brought the idea of worship. The oldest Hindu culture, the Vedic culture, believed in performing rituals individually in their respective homes. So that apart, we find, at least for Catholics, participation in these sacraments or rituals are vital to one's spiritual health and salvation. Without that, you won't get it. So that's why the priests or ministers, they serve as intermediaries who say that without our presence, you may not be able to do these rituals yourself. So going to the church becomes important. Hindus, on the other hand, the Hindu tradition says that all the acts of ritual are simply they are tokens of our devotion. We are trying to express our devotion. We try to express our devotion, and they're at the most they're aids to meditation. Suppose you do some ritual in puja or other Hindu ritual, it has to be done individually, though a priest may be involved. But if a priest does a ritual for you, you may get some benefit, because a lot of priestcraft has entered Hinduism, and most of the people think that this priestcraft will ensure some kind of salvation, punya, or it will help, but it will not help. It will not be an aid to our meditation. If somebody else does the puja or does the ritual, it's not going to help us. So if we use our rituals like meditation, like offering flowers, just as an aid to meditation, or maybe as a token of our devotion to the Lord, so that our heart expands, if they can be performed very easily by any householder in his own home. This is before priestcraft started dominating the Hindu society, as it dominated most of the other Semitic religions. But Swami Vivekananda and Sri Ramakrishna, though Sri Ramakrishna did rituals, but his rituals were done out of freedom. They are very valuable aids to help you concentrate the mind, especially to a beginner. But they are by no means indispensable. You can't say these rituals are indispensable. At least the Hindus don't believe. If you can do it. If you can't do it, if you can't do formal worship, then also it's okay. Do mental worship. If you can't do it, just repeat the name. So if you so wish, you can approach God by any path, through just repetition of the name, or even through just meditation, or just intellectual thinking on the meaning of the scriptures and trying to internalize them. So you can approach God through many paths. That freedom is there in Hinduism. So we have to understand the difference, that unlike the sacraments or the rituals of Christianity, no Hindu teacher would expect a real teacher or a real guru will tell his disciple to practice a ritualistic, a constrained ritualistic path. a path in which you have to do this ritual exactly like this. There are certain sects which believe in that, but that discipline is not very strict. And even if it is strict, it does not lead to spiritual progress unless it is done with devotion, with some goal in mind. So, the Hindu ritual corresponds to, very nearly, it corresponds to the Mass or the Lord's Supper. It is extremely elaborate and it requires unbroken attention. So, in a way, these ideas of the Mass, which the equivalent of the Mass in Christianity, is also performed in Hinduism, but these rituals are to be done with utmost unbroken attention. So, some people believe that it is an excellent training for the wandering mind of a beginner. So, for a beginner, these rituals may be necessary because since our mind is so restless, it may make sense to follow these rituals because at least because of some faith or because of some discipline, self-discipline. Maybe it is out of compulsion, out of some kind of fear. But if it is done in a proper way, you get to know how much of concentration you have attained. So performing a ritual properly is also an act of concentration, just as performing the duties that have been allotted to you by virtue of your swadharma or by virtue of your station in life. The same concentration, if we apply to other secular work also, it should lead theoretically to the same goal. Because you will be so busy thinking about the act or the sacrament or the various rituals of different religions, the corresponding devotees, they do these rituals with, if they do it sincerely, any ritual with attention, it will at least serve some kind of initial or preliminary training for the wandering mind of the beginner. Now, thought and action and thought, they form a chain. So these rituals are designed in such a way that every action results in a particular thought. If you pay full attention to that ritual, and every action gives rise to a thought, every thought follows an action, or action follows a thought. So we can achieve a very high degree of concentration even from the beginning with the help of these rituals. And moreover, it serves the purpose of imparting some kind of humility. When you do something as a worship, something as a sense of serving God in a humble, very humble but direct and intimate manner, you try to feel the presence of God. So there is nothing wrong in following these rituals. That is the idea behind this first verse. Tapaha, Swadhyaya, Ishvara, Pranidhanani. These are the three methods of Kriya Yoga. So Brahmanand used to say, when a man has to begin his spiritual journey from where he is, he can't aspire to directly go into Samadhi and attain high levels of concentration right from beginning. That is why we start with asana, yama, niyama, which are rituals in some form, some kind of self-discipline, some kind of tapaha, some kind of swadhyaya, and then we have asana, pranayama, then we go higher and higher and higher, and then finally reach the seventh stage of samadhi after the stage of dhyana. Now, if an average man, a ordinary man who is just taken to spiritual life, is instructed to meditate on his union with the absolute Brahman, he can't do it. He will not understand. He will ask you, what do you mean by that? How can I unite myself to something which I can't even perceive? So he will neither grasp the truth of it, nor will be able to follow the instructions which his guru might give him. If he says you meditate on the formless God full of consciousness, he will get some idea, but he will find it difficult to focus the mind on that truth. So if the same man, if he is asked to worship God with flowers, incense and other accessories of ritualistic worship, his mind, you can see, will gradually become concentrated on God. And if he is doing it with sincerity and devotion, he will find joy in his worship. So that is tapaha. So all these rituals, self-imposed, willingly done rituals, which should give you joy. Otherwise, if it gives you pain, then something is wrong. So all this tapasya has to be done with an intense feeling of joy in a spirit of dedication. Ishvara pranidhana means surrendering all the rituals and the fruits of the rituals to the Lord, saying that, oh Lord, it is my privilege to do this, to serve you in this, through this ritual. If that attitude is there, it can be very helpful. And slowly it will lead to the higher levels of concentration on God. And he will also, as a byproduct, he will feel joy in that worship. So here, another thing is study, tapas swadhyaya. In the sense of, in the next aphorism, it means study of scriptures and other books which deal with spiritual life. That is swadhyaya. It's not just any subject which you study. That is not swadhyaya according to yoga. It may be some kind of other adhyaya or study, secular study, but it has nothing to do. Swadhyaya means spiritual study. It also means practice of japam, the repetition of the name of the God, because that is also swadhyaya. When you do japa, you think of the meaning of the mantra, you meditate on the God. So there is some sense of dedication, some sense of doing, some sense of understanding, which does not make it, so you can't say japa is just a tapasya or some austerity. No, it is done with knowledge. So it means it is a swadhyaya. Swadhyaya means swa adhyaya, trying to know more and more about your own self, trying to understand the nature, true nature of your personality. That is known as swadhyaya. Any study of any physics, chemistry, biology cannot be swadhyaya, because that deals with study of external nature. Whereas Swadhyaya here, in this context, in this sutra, it means spiritual study, or that study which tells you something about your inner self, about your inner personality, not just the external world and the external personality. In fact, the word personality has come from the word persona. Persona means a mask. So in reality, you are pure Sat Chit Ananda. All of us know, according to Vedanta or according to any religion, your original nature is a degraded state from your higher nature originally. So whether you descended from Adam because of the original sin or some other method because of your karma, there are so many theories. But the idea that you have descended from a highly superior state, a state in which you are identified with Brahman, but unfortunately, now you have put on different masks. You are hiding the real you. So when you talk of personality, when somebody says, oh, he's a man with great personality, we are just describing the mask. Either that he's tall, he's short, he's good, he's bad, he's intelligent, he's white, he's black, he's brown. All those qualities, they are just different masks. We put on so many masks every day that we forget our essential nature. So that is the main point to be remembered here, that these masks do not describe our personality, real personality. I'm muting everybody. Yeah. So dedication of all the fruits of one's work to God is a spiritual exercise of vital importance. That comes under the third category of Ishvara Pranidhana. Ishvara Pranidhana means surrendering or dedicating the fruits of one's work to God. It is a spiritual exercise which is complementary to tapaha and swadhyaya. So swadhyaya means spiritual study, and uh, Ishvara Pranidhana means a spiritual exercise where you do all these small kinds of rituals or other worship by uh, dedicating that work to God. You can even do your daily duties, the duties which you are compelled to do as you because of your swadharma. That is known as karma yoga. It is the way of union with God through the performance of, you can say, a God dedicated action. In following karma yoga, then you find if you are practicing karma yoga, then your whole life becomes a ritual. So you don't have to do any other ritual like mass or going to the church or going to the temple, appointing a priest. We don't need intermediary. There is God. We can dedicate everything to God. So we don't need priests, whether it is Hinduism, Islam, or Christianity. The role of priests is always secondary. It is only when we are ignorant, we do not know. There are certain methods, certain prescriptions which our scriptures tell us to do. So till you learn, you can depend on these priests, but afterwards you have to do it yourself. That is why Hinduism insists on a path known as Karma Yoga, where it is a way of union with God through the performance of action which you are dedicating to God. So every action is an offering to God, not with the hope of some personal gain or advantage in life. We must never offer our prayer or worship or rituals to God with the hope of getting some worldly advantage. We should not do, because it doesn't serve the purpose. It is only with the, if we do this, dedicate our actions in a with a higher purpose in mind, a spiritual purpose in mind, then you get the fruits. Otherwise, you will be simply adding more and more karma. You desire something, you go to God and ask Him to solve your problems. In the words of Sri Krishna, it is like going to a big king, and when the king is ready to give you gold, you are asking for pumpkins. So in the spiritual world also it is like that. If we do all these rituals in expectation of a simple some return which we could have earned it ourselves for a little money or for a little worldly material, if we do that, which we could earn with our effort, we don't need to go to God for that, then we are wasting our resources. So according to yoga, uh, it may be okay in the initial stages if you are doing rituals with some temporary solution in mind, but ultimately it should, to become karma yoga, a perfect karma yoga, we should do to the best of our ability, do the work perfectly, and then offer it unconditionally to God. We have to dedicate the fruits of one's work to God. For doing that, kind of swadhyaya or that kind of Ishvara Pranidhana, we should have some kind of vairagya or non-attachment. So non-attachment and dedicated performance of karma yoga, they go hand in hand. You can't separate the two. So that is why what happens is, in that case, when suppose some work you are trying to offer it to God and something goes wrong, then you don't get upset, because we don't do, results are not in our hand. That is why that famous slok in the Bhagavad Gita which says, Karmanye vadika raste ma phaleshu kadachana. You have a right to do the work and then you offer it to God. Try to do your best. But don't expect, if you expect a particular result, that thing should go this way or that way, then you will be disappointed. So, and you will not get the benefit of Ishvara Pranidhana. So that is not Karma Yoga. So, and on the other hand, suppose it is successful, you get the results, then also there is a danger, because that may give right to pride, that I have done perfectly. Oh, I have done this, I have done that, I have offered it. My puja is the best, my worship is the best. So you get praise because the work is successful, you are doing it in a very nice way. But if the ego increases, then the benefit of doing the work perfectly, karma yoga, does not happen. So for karma yoga to happen, it's not just abhyasa, but vairagya also. So all men and women, all spiritual people who were genuinely great, they did work in this spirit, their duty in this spirit. They did it with lot of integrity, and even though they may be atheists, they need not believe in a God or offer it to God, but they love that work. They love the work that they are doing, and it gives them joy just to do it perfectly without bothering what happens, or I mean, without bothering whether that work will lead to success or not. If they lack devotion to God and they don't believe in a personal God, but still they do karma yoga with non-attachment, then also it becomes kriya yoga. So the first kriya yoga consists of tapasya, tapaha, swadhyaya, ishvara pranidhana. So absolute non-attachment is not indifference to the work. One has to remember this difference, that if you are indifferent, that doesn't mean, if you are not attached to the results of the work, then there may be a temptation to do the work haphazardly. No, that is not what is meant. That's why Sri Krishna says yoga karmasu kaushalam. It is dexterity in work. So you can't offer haphazardly done rituals and then say, I've done some kind of puja or some kind of ritual and I'm done with it. You have to do it with dedication. You have to do it with non-attachment and then not bother about the results. That is the idea. Not bothering about the result doesn't mean that we should be indifferent to the way we do these rituals. So the people who are fatalists, they never have any kind of enthusiasm. They do their work in a very slipshod manner. It doesn't matter whether there is a, they don't even try hard to get the desired result. Though one should not hanker for the result, that doesn't mean you have to do the work with half attentiveness or without proper attention. So, so he this type of person thinks that whether I try hard or not, anyway, Gita tells me not to bother about the result. So why should I work hard? I might as well do it in a very haphazard manner. But this attitude is not accepted in Hinduism. It is a fatalistic approach that because you are lazy, because one is lazy, the work which he appears to be non-attachment, he's really not non-attached. He's terribly attached, but the thing is he's weak not to be able to do it perfectly. And then he says it is fate. So Sri Ramakrishna gave so many parables trying to explain this point. And he saw and misguided so many people like Hajara, who were faking that they are detached, they had renunciation, just because they could not look after their families. So Sri Ramakrishna did not like that. So such kind of fatalists, they will lose this world as well as they will lose the other world, the spiritual world. So unless one is really detached, or unless one is totally dedicated and sincere as far as Ishvara Pranidhana is concerned, he doesn't deserve to be called a karma yogi, or he is not practicing his kriya yoga. Kriya yoga is nothing but karma yoga, and Patanjali uses a different word. Now Swamiji says a few points about this study. What is meant by study? Swadhyaya. It is not study of any novel or any story books or any other secular book, but that which teaches us the liberation of the soul, that which tells us about the higher and higher realities of spiritual life, that which teaches us how to be liberated, how to attain to moksha, how to attain to yoga, or how to attain to this get concentration. This study also, even though it is dealing with spirituality, doesn't mean that one has to enter into any controversy, whether this path is correct or that path is correct. Depending on the taste and the capacity of the individual, there are different paths. So we should not have the vada. There are two words in Sanskrit. One is vada, arguing for argument's sake. We don't want to practice anything, but we will go on criticizing other religions, other sects, other paths, and say, oh, that is not, this is the right way. But if it is the right way, why don't you practice it? But if it is just for the sake of argument, you are wasting your time. Swamiji says that is not Swadhyaya. It has to become Siddhanta. Siddhanta means a conviction based on faith. That is known as Shraddha. Shraddha or Siddhanta, which the decisive knowledge you gain from the scriptures, not the argumentative, which is known as Vada. So there will be a lot of fighting when these people will try to establish their point of view, saying this is the right path, this is the right method, and that is the wrong method. But what's the use? Have you practiced it? If you don't practice it, whether you're following the right method or the wrong method, it doesn't matter because you're not practicing anything. So Swamiji says, so Swadhyaya doesn't mean reading a lot of books. And he says, there is a Sanskrit quote which he quotes. He says, books are infinite in number and time is short. Therefore, the secret of knowledge is to take what is essential. Take that from the scripture and live up to it. The gospel is an excellent book. Sri Ramakrishna establishes this method, which Swamiji is explaining here. He says he never read any books. He never went into argument with anybody. He simply knew that his time is short. He has to realize the truths which he hears from others or from the scriptures. So whether somebody reads out to him, whether he himself is able to read a little bit, he doesn't care. He says, I have known or I have heard these truths. Am I able to act in such a way or do sadhana in such a way that I can realize these truths? So the secret of knowledge is not to know many things, but to take what is essential and live up to it. So there is a old legend. I explained this in my previous class also. The Hamsa, Rajhamsa or the royal swan, it is known as Paramahamsa. It has a knack of taking what is, if you keep a lot of milk mixed with water, it will take only the milk and throw away the water. It has a special mechanism in its mouth which enables it to discard the water and take the essence of the milk. That is what they say. So this vada may be necessary in the beginning to establish a certain point, but after that, because we should not blindly follow any path, we have to make some reasoning. There should be some reasoning and some intellectual gymnastics are necessary in the beginning, but one should not just go on round and round trying to intellectually get convinced and not doing anything. So after a sadhaka or a spiritual aspirant has passed the argumentative state and he has come to a siddhanta or a conclusion, which is like an immovable rock, that faith should be firm, full of conviction. The only thing he now needs to do after getting convinced, after having Shraddha in the scriptures, Shraddha in the methods of the scriptures, Shraddha in the sutras, if you have faith, now we have to work hard and then we have to intensify that conclusion or that conviction. When it intensifies, we get the experience. So when we do Swadhyaya, one of the guidelines that is given by Patanjali or by great scholars or great sadhakas is do not argue. If somebody tries to force his point of view, just be silent. Even if you don't agree with him, do not answer any argument, but go away calmly, because the arguments will only disturb the mind. The only thing that is necessary is to train the intellect. That is why Swadhyaya has to be done. Spiritual study, scriptural study is just to train your own mind, train our own mind. The intellect is a very weak instrument, so it can give us limited knowledge only. So what's the point in disturbing that intellect by reading many books, trying to understand many things? So it can give our intellect can give only that much of knowledge which is brought to us through uh, by the participation of the senses and the mind. The senses see certain things, the mind, the reactive mind comes to certain conclusions, and the buddhi tries to distinguish between uh, what is good, what is bad. Up to that point, it is fine. But beyond that, intellect, you go on cogitating and always have this doubt whether I should do this or should I go for Shreya, should I go for prayer, that which should I go after the good or the pleasant. Now, after having understood what is really good for you, what is really bad for you, then we don't have to disturb the mind further. We have to hold on to our conviction, which by the grace of God has come to us either through the scriptures or through the teacher, and then sit quietly and try to internalize all those thoughts. So the intellect is a very weak instrument. It can give us knowledge, but limited knowledge. The yogi wants to go beyond the senses, beyond the indriyas, beyond the mind, beyond the reactive mind, and even beyond buddhi. Buddhi is an instrument in the beginning, but afterwards buddhi itself becomes an impediment. The intellect acts, increases the ego, and then we think we know many things, when really in reality we don't know the real one, knowing which everything else will be known. As the Upanishad says, and as Sri Ramakrishna says, if you put hundreds of zeros after one, then it has value. But if you remove the one and just go on adding zeros, then everything will be a zero. So this world and the Prakriti, or the different methods and different sadhanas, different paths, they are like these zeros. If they are done for God, if that one is there, then all the zeros, the more zeros you add, the more you add value to that, more its value increases. So disturbance in the chitta because of arguments is not a desirable state. So Patanjali says Swadhyaya means, or Swamiji says, explaining this Swadhyaya, that Swadhyaya should not be done just to satisfy your curiosity and know more and more things so that you can boast and tell, I know this, I know that. But what does it really matter if you know it, unless you experience the truths that are contained therein? So unnecessarily disturbing the chitta, and which results in lack of concentration, is a result of this kind of argumentative approach to spirituality. Or too much of reasoning is not good. Reasoning, there is a limit to what reason can reveal to you or reveal to us. So arguments and other reasonings and all are only on the way. After having done it, after having chosen the right path, then we have to discard those things also. There are much higher things beyond them. The whole life, as Swamiji famously says, is not for schoolboy fights or debating society. It is okay at a younger age, these debates, these schoolboy fights and these quarrels, that was part of our life because of our ignorance. But once you grow up, you can't expect grown-up people to fight unless they are still childish. They are not yet matured. You can't, you will not find them, mature people, unnecessarily wasting their time on trivials of life. That is why Ishvara Pranidhana is the final step after Swadhyaya and Tapaha, surrendering the fruits of work to God. That is to take neither credit nor blame for all the things that you are doing. You give your best, but don't take credit if you succeed, and don't blame others if you don't. You have to be accept everything as it is. To give up both success and failure to the Lord. We have to be very direct in our approach. Otherwise, it will make us miserable. We say, if it works out fine, I'm doing my best, then it is yours. If it doesn't work out properly, then also the decision or the problem is yours. I will be at peace. I will just do exactly what is expected of me, and I will not bother about the results. Give self-surrender or Ishvara Pranidhana to the Lord is the third step tapaha, that is austerity, or self-discipline, that is a better word. So tapaha means self-discipline, where you control the body, the senses, the mind, and everything gross, and take it towards higher and higher spiritual levels. So then comes Swadhyaya, trying to find out through reasoning, of course, till to the extent reasoning can help us. We go deeper and deeper and try to understand the essential. And as Swamiji says, the time is short. We should not be wasting time in reading certain scriptures, certain books, just for the heck of doing it. If it really serves our purpose, if it improves our spiritual life, the quality of our spiritual life, it helps us to gain some experience, spiritual experience, I mean, then it has to be followed in a very diligent and systematic way. So, and not to trivialize all these things. Whether you do rituals, formal rituals, or you just do all your service activities, or even your daily duties in and through the Lord, dedicating everything to the Lord, then alone you can be at peace. That abhyasa and vairagya will both take possession of your personality, and that vairagya will help you to maintain a peaceful existence in spite of the unpeaceful outer circumstances. So circumstances do not affect us. Under any circumstances, we find we have the strength, the inner strength to be at peace, because we have decided voluntarily to do Ishvara Pranidhana, means to give up both to the Lord. Whether we are successful or not successful, whether we have done, even though we have tried to do our best, it may not be successful. But the Lord is not pleased. He at least the reason why we should do it is that if we give up both the results, the idea of the results, if we surrender to the Lord, then we don't have to worry. We'll not be anxious. We'll not be full of so-called worry and anxiety about what will happen if. But if you have offered everything to the Lord with a spirit of self-surrender, then there is no problem. So that is the sutra number 1. Now, Samadhi Bhavanartha, the second sutra, Klesha Tanu Karanartha Cha. So, what is this Klesha? Now, there are many terms which we have to understand properly. We are almost running short of time. So, I'll just read the meaning of this sutra and we'll discuss it next time. The meaning is, it is for the practice of Samadhi. Samadhi is the goal which we have discussed in the first 50 sutras of the first chapter. Samadhi Bhavanartha, for the practice of Samadhi, or to reach the state of different levels of Samadhi which we discussed, and minimizing the pain-bearing obstructions. Klesha means painful obstructions. Kleshas are subtle things. They are in the chitta. We have a lot of kleshas in us. Kleshas are nothing but desires. Now these desires are known as pain-bearing obstructions, because the only result ultimately they bring about is pain. So we have to minimize klesha tanu karana, to reduce, to minimize, to purify the kleshas is the goal. And these things are, Kriya Yoga is for the practice of Samadhi. The Kriya Yoga which we described in the first verse, in the first sutra of the second chapter, the purpose is to practice, for the practice of Samadhi, different levels of Samadhi, after attaining different, passing through all the Ashtanga 8 paths, the 7 paths, and then coming to the last path. So Kriya Yoga should be constantly practiced, because they minimize, they help, they are not only helpful for the practice of our concentration and ultimately Samadhi, but they are also on the way, or while we are doing it, they have the capacity to minimize, to lessen the pain-bearing obstructions. Pain-bearing obstructions means kleshas. So the kleshas are a resultant of our wrong thoughts, wrong desires, wrong ambitions, something gone wrong, and then these kleshas start popping up from our subconscious mind. Our mind is full of kleshas right now. So to counteract them and restrain their pain-bearing obstruction or capacity, these samskaras or these kleshas, they are pain bearing because they have somehow managed to stick to us and they are refusing to leave us. They are in our subconscious mind or the chitta, and they have the potential, though they may not be active right now, they have the potential to prop up and destroy our personality altogether. So we have to identify them. Most of us, our minds are like spoiled children. We just allow our mind to do whatever it wants. We just relax, we just allow. Uh, Therefore, the practice of Kriya Yoga is very essential to gain control of the mind and to bring it back to our subjection. I should rule my mind, the mind should not rule me. So the obstructions to yoga, they arise only because of lack of control of the senses. And because there was no control, we do not regulate our gross, the subtle and the causal level. We don't bother about the mind, how it functions. We just, if at all we do something, we just take care of the body, that's all. Even that we don't do. In our greed, in our busy schedule, we are not able to do that. Take care of our body also sometimes. But at least we try to take care. But what about the spirit? The spirit which is within, which has to be cultivated, which has to be made kinetic. It is potential right now. That divinity is potential. Once it comes out, once it is uh, through Kriya Yoga, if it is brought out, then our mind will come under control and it will be, the mind can be brought by us to some kind of subjection. With that subdued mind, with that subdued klesha, the pain-bearing obstructions will slowly vanish. We can destroy these kleshas and then lead a very happy and a content life. So now I'll just see if there are, today I had a very long session on the universal personality of Swami Vivekananda. It was conducted by one of online, of course, and it was there from 12:30 to almost 1:45. So I just finished that, and after that, tomorrow also there are two major programs. One is also at the same time, 12 o'clock, where the program is organized by the Bhagavad Gita Research Foundation. So Swami Vivekananda and his thoughts on the Bhagavad Gita, they will be the topic of my keynote address, which if everything goes according to schedule, will be around noon, and it will end for, it is a half an hour talk. So if you are free, you can, I have given all the links. There is a small registration process which is free. You can just click on Eventbrite and register yourself, and you will be able to log in. They will allow you inside the Zoom session. So the nearly, I think more than 200-500 people can attend that. So all are welcome. You can just check out for the links that I have given on the WhatsApp group. So if you just click on that tomorrow, somebody will let you in and then you can attend the program. Of course, it is a whole day program. There are quite a few speakers, and I'm going to post the detailed program for the day. It begins at 9 in the morning and ends at 5:30 in the evening. So it's a very long program. Perhaps you may not be able to watch the entire program, but some portions of that you can select and watch. So tomorrow we have two classes. One is at from 12 to 1 or 12:30, and then again in the evening we have the Gospel of Holy Mother class. So I take your leave, and I'll just see if there are any questions in the chat. Yeah. What is action in inaction and inaction in action? Kindly explain. Now Swamiji used this word that we have to be we have to experience inaction in action. What it means is, even if we are doing intense action, our mind should be calm. Inaction, the inactive, the mind will be active, the body will be active, but we will be established in the spirit, in our real nature. And after having touched the spirit, we do the work. So that is inaction in action. Action is going on, everything we are doing, but we are at deep rest. It is not making us restless. So that is inaction in action. And action in inaction means, suppose you are sitting somewhere and you don't allow the mind to just wander here and there, but you are intensely meditating, intensely focused on the goal of your life. That is action in inaction. Inaction physically, yes, but mentally the mind is very active, one pointed, leading towards concentration. So that is known as uh, action in inaction. And as I said, inaction in action is to maintain that calm temperament even when the circumstances around you are extremely disturbing. So that is the idea behind action in inaction. So I'll take your leave. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.